All right, let's look at pedigrees really quickly. So pedigrees are simply visual representations of many generations specified on a single trait. So this pedigree is looking at color blindness in humans, and our squares are male. So that's male, and our circles are female. And we're just showing that this couple mated and they had these children. And so child. Here's an individual that came in from another family and made babies with that individual. So you can just see generation 1, 2, 3 for the parent generation, and all of the subsequent generations. So individuals that are shaded have the disorder. Individuals that are half shaded, as it says up here, are carriers. The great majority of our affected individuals are males, and that gives us a really good clue that this disorder is sex-linked. We do have a female that is affected here, and that makes sense because that kiddo had mom who was a carrier and dad who was colorblind. And so mom's genotype would look like that, so lowercase c, and dad's would look like that. And so the potential genotypes of the offspring, carrier daughter, which is here, and colorblind daughter, this one here, and normal male, right there, and colorblind male, right there. So this family had a very statistically appropriate family, genotypic, phenotypic spread. Doesn't always happen that way, but sometimes it does. And so this one we can say colorblindness is sex-linked. The great majority of the individuals affected are male. Only the females are carriers. Females have the trait only if dad is affected and mom's a carrier. So here's another example of a pedigree. I have female, male, female. So a fairly even number of males and females affected. You don't see any individuals having the disorder when the parents don't show it. So these two parents don't have the disorder, and these two children also don't. This can give us a pretty good hint, not for sure, but this tells us that probably it's dominant, because if I had two heterozygous parents, we could see that recessive allele pop up. That we don't see that happening leads us to believe that this is more likely dominant, and that we have fairly equal numbers of females and males that are affected. That we don't have any carrier females lets us know that it's autosomal. So it's not sex-linked. It's on those other chromosomes. Good. It's a little practice with pedigrees here. So again, I see my different generations, 1, 2, and 3. So let's see if we can figure out the genotypes for the individuals. So in generation 3, individual number 3, what do we think this individual's genotype is going to be? So notice that parent has it, parent doesn't have it, none of the children have it. This parent does not have the trait, but these ones do. And so I'm led to believe that these parents were probably both heterozygous, which allowed for this individual and this one too to both be homozygous recessive. If the trait appears in a generation, but not the one prior, it's almost certainly going to be recessive. And for that trait to be expressed, it's got to be homozygous recessive. How about in generation number 2, individual number 1 here? Well, this parent has it. We decided that probably means that it is homozygous recessive to have the disorder. This one doesn't, so this mom has to have at least one big A. This individual is going to absolutely get one of those alleles from dad, and so she's going to have to be heterozygous. So this one is heterozygous. Good. Roman numeral 1, number 1, we totally just did that. Grandpa is homozygous recessive. And then generation 2, individual number 4, talked about that too. In order for these two parents to have children that are affected, they both need to be heterozygous. So that parent is also heterozygous. Is the trait dominant or recessive? Definitely recessive, because we saw it in a offspring generation, but not in the parent generation just prior. Good. All right, so let's talk about genetic diseases really quickly. Sickle cell anemia is one that we've talked about when we were looking at DNA. So sickle cell is a mutation in the hemoglobin gene, and dominant is normal and recessive means that you have hemoglobin that's misshapen, and so your red blood cells can become misshapen, especially if you are in an environment with less oxygen. Cystic fibrosis, we're going to talk about a little bit more on a later slide. Hemophilia is a sex-linked blood disorder. Huntington's is autosomal dominant, which is weird, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. PKU phenylketonuria is a genetic disorder that babies in the United States are tested for at birth. Kiddos who have PKU cannot eat a certain amino acid, and so you just have to be really careful with the protein intake. Tay-Sachs is another one, Marfan syndrome, about 4,000 more, which sounds like a lot, but genetic diseases are pretty rare because tragically most of the individuals that have them die before they can pass that trait on. Good. Not good. I mean, it's tragic, but more ideas. So let's look at Huntington's here really quickly. We did talk about it being autosomal dominant. CDC estimates that about 1 in 10,000 people in the United States has Huntington's. What's kind of tragic about Huntington's is that you're not symptomatic until you're older. And so it's odd that it's an autosomal dominant disease, and it's a lethal one. Generally, diseases that are autosomal dominant are going to get kind of pulled out of the population. These alleles don't persist because they're not passed on, because generally individuals don't have babies if they have these disorders. What's weird about Huntington's is that you don't get sick until you get old. You've already passed this fatal trait onto your children before you know that you have this fatal trait. Now we know better. We can test for it, but it's persisted in our population for quite some time because you had your babies, you passed on the trait before you even realized that you had the disorder. Cystic fibrosis is another genetic disorder that is autosomal recessive, so it persists a little more easily because it can hide in carriers, and it definitely is different from one population to the next. So far more prevalent in Caucasians than in other groups, and it's a mutation on chromosome number 7, results in greater mucus being formed in the lungs. People start to suffocate from the inside. Also messes up, there's more mucus in the digestive system. The pancreas, the bile ducts, and the liver can get clogged with all of this mucus. Sickle cell we talked about, another autosomal recessive, so not sex-linked, but yes, recessive, and so it can hide in carriers. Far more prevalent in African American births than in Caucasian or Native American births. And it's because we talked about a long time ago that quirky connection to malaria resistance. So people who were heterozygous for sickle cell were able to survive in areas where there was lots of malaria. We're going to pause here and then finish up this last chunk momentarily.